be happy to answer any questions, but there was a lot of misinformation out there. Please read the ordinance because it's very clear, it's concise,
Let's wrap
and it
it up,
doesn't
sir.
interfere with people's lives.
Wrap it up, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Member. Appreciate it.
Let the record show that Assemblyperson Beniers, I had 6:15. Record keeper says 6:16, so one of the two. Pardon? Oh, you were. Oh, okay. All right. And I don't think we picked that up, so we will need to have you fill the clerk in at what time you were on the phone. Okay, thank you. Anyone else that would like to address the Assembly and the Planning Commission? Okay, Caleb, do we have anybody online? No? Okay. I'll give you one last chance then. As I said at the beginning, this is the only opportunity. There is no public hearing this evening to address any of the items that are on the agenda. Okay. I will go ahead and close audience participation. And we will now look at the joint items of business. And the first one is the Parks High. Let's see, Madam Clerk, do you want to read those in, or are we just going to let this borough manager just step up there and start talking? Yeah, he's a good talker, so I'll let him go.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Assembly, and Planning Commissioners. Mike Brown, Borough Manager. I just wanted to take a quick second. The borough has lobbied DOT for years to have a presence in the valley. All the engineers, construction management folks, with the exception of the M&O office out here in the valley, we're all based in Anchorage. So over recent years, they've acquired a structure out on Seward Meridian Parkway and have recently established a district office. So we now have that permanent DOT presence. So I wanted to introduce Mr. Clint Adler, if you'd stand. He is the new Mat-Su District Office Chief out here. So we'll probably be seeing more of him in the future. And if we have things related to DOT that we want him to come to speak to or inform, he'll be available out here in the valley now. So I just wanted to take a moment to recognize that and say thanks to DOT. We appreciate them having that presence out here. I think as we grow as a community, we're starting to see some of that state agency presence out here, which makes them a little bit more accessible. And I would argue they probably have a little bit better understanding of our community needs, et cetera, by being out here. Many of them already live out here and do the commute into Anchorage, so it's great to have an office out here. So I just wanted to take a quick moment and acknowledge that, say thanks to DOT and introduce Clint. Now I'm going to invite up DOT. They're going to make an introduction for the Parks Highway Alternative Corridor and give you an update as a body on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, good evening. My name is Kelly Summers, and I'm a project manager with the State of Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. Thank you for giving us time on your agenda tonight to talk about our Parks Highway Alternative Corridor Planning Environmental Linkage Project. With me tonight is Renee Weitzel from our consultant team with Dowell, and she's here to give you a presentation on the project and the associated partnering agreement. So with that, I will give it to Renee.
All right, thank you very much to all of you for having us here this evening. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Renee Weitzel. I am a project manager with Dowell based in Anchorage, and I'm here to provide you with an update on the Parks Highway Alternative Corridor Planning and Environmental Linkage Study. And that's the last time I'm going to say planning and environmental linkage study because it's really long. So I'm just going to refer to it as a PEL study from now on. So as many of you are aware, the State of Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities has identified a need for a future highway corridor in the Wasilla area of the Mat-Su since the 1980s. There have been numerous studies that have occurred, but none of those have been successful in actually moving something forward towards project development. There has been sustained and relatively high population growth in the Mat-Su, which I'm sure you're all aware of. And that's continuing to increase traffic volumes on the city's main corridor, the Parks Highway, which is creating significant traffic congestions during peak periods. We know network improvements are needed, and there'll be a wide variety of environmental, resource, land use, and public involvement challenges. And to address these challenges, DOT has chosen to use the PEL process. So just when we talk about the PEL process, what it does is it essentially matches planning, transportation planning, and environmental analysis. And that's one of the reasons why we have up on the screen a project area. So the northern boundary of the project area that we're considering for an alternative corridor is framed by the Parks Highway. And then we're looking at the area approximately between the Higher Road interchange on the eastern side of our project area and Hawk Lane closest to Houston as tie-in points for an alternative corridor. We are very early in the study process. We did kick off in midway through last year, and initially we undertook a baseline analysis of environmental conditions. We have completed an origin destination study using big data to look at where traffic is moving to. And we've also moved forward with trying to evaluate the performance of the system in terms of what is going on right now and what we'd like to see on an alternative facility. And you'll see on the schedule figure that there is a white dot, which is our first public open house meeting. We have that coming up on March 29th. So I would encourage all of you to participate in that meeting. Out to the residents in our study area to let them know to get involved in the project. So using the PEL process, what we're trying to do is make sure the reasons why an alternative corridor is needed. So as there is a good level of buy-in as to what we're proposing, and we're also hoping that by identifying a range of alternatives and then narrowing down into a recommended one or more alternatives, that will help the process then move forward much more quickly once funding is assigned for project development. So that raises the question, why am I here talking to you this evening? As I mentioned, there has been a very significant public outreach process that we're just embarking on at the moment, and that includes a technical advisory committee, which we have several staff from Matsubara participating in, and I'd like to do a shout out and thank you to all of them. And we also have a stakeholder advisory committee. And during our kickoff meeting for our technical advisory committee, we presented a partnering agreement, which essentially sets out terms that says that those that are involved in our technical advisory committee, which is essentially agencies including Matsubara, City of Wasilla, City of Houston, the Corps of Engineers, Alaska Railroad, and the DOT, that they will work together collaboratively to share information on existing conditions in the corridor area, to identify potential corridor alternatives, to evaluate those corridor alternatives, and to move towards a recommended alternative. So really, they're all partnering together to make sure that this project really does happen. The agreement is non-binding. It is essentially an agreement to work together. One of the staff representatives, and that is Brad Swartz, did request that we bring that partnering agreement to the Matsubara Assembly to request a resolution to have that partnering agreement signed. So that's the purpose of our presentation tonight, is to let you know about the study, let you know about the partnering agreement we've proposed, and to request that resolution. So I'm very happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Yes, you answered them already. Very good.
All right, well, thank you very much to all of you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor.
So through the mayor, the PEL study would come before the whole NEPA process. So you finalize the PEL study and then you would go into the NEPA process. Is that how it would go?
That is correct, but one of the major benefits of undertaking the PEL process is that the analysis that's undertaken during the PEL process can be incorporated into the NEPA process. So in terms of evaluating and screening alternatives, all of that can be done early on, which speeds up the NEPA process.
Further questions? All righty. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're ready for item B then. For the Metropolitan Planning Organization discussion. Okay.
Hi, I'm Kim Solian. I'm the Planning Services Manager, and I have the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about transportation planning and how it's going to change in the future for the Mat-Su and certainly a portion of the core area. And I just want to say hello to the new Planning Commissioner members. I haven't been to a Planning Commission meeting in a long time, and there are so many new faces, so I'll try to make sure to come to the next one and introduce myself to you personally. So I just was going to give a brief overview of the MPO since we do have some new faces, both on the Assembly and on the Planning Commission, and then hopefully there'll be time for some questions. So.
Just point it at me, Kim, when you change.
Oh, okay, thank you. So what is an MPO and why do we need one? So we have expected for, well, at least the past 10 years, we thought in 2012 that a portion of the core area was going to be designated as urbanized. And with that urbanized area designation, because of population growth, the federal government was going to require us to form a metropolitan planning organization for that. Density has grown to reach a number of 50,000 people or more in a contiguous area with more than 1,000 people per square mile or more than 385 houses per square mile. So what this map is showing is that we did a rough calculation with our GIS data in-house and our dwellings and our parcel and kind of mapped out that area shaded in orange kind of highlights that more than 50,000 people in an area with a population density greater than 1,000 people per square mile. So the census hasn't come out with a designation yet. They're kind of behind on releasing the 2020 census, but we expect it to come out next month and we will. So
Ask a quick question.
Yeah.
So it's 1,000 people per square mile. What was the house one or the rest?
or I believe it's 385 dwelling units per square mile. And so
Okay.
what the note on the map is highlighting is that we actually have more dwelling units per square mile at minimum that the census may use to designate the urbanized area. So thanks for that question, Assemblymember Yunt. The census in 2000, they might change it to use dwelling units. And so that's why we're looking at both population density and dwelling unit.
Kim, I think Deputy Mayor maybe had a question.
Yeah, through
Thank you.
the mayor, is our area just the orange or is looks like, kind of an oddly shaped area,
So
right?
yeah,
I mean,
that was our rough attempt at trying to figure out what the census is going to tell us based on the data that we have, because we haven't gotten their data. So we had to draw a boundary that had that level of population density or dwelling unit density in a contiguous area to reach the number of over 50,000. And so that's what that rough orange blob looks like. I assume the boundary that the census is going to send us is going to be a more solid color and have a solid outline. And so that will be the minimum boundary of our urbanized area. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we are going to determine what the MPO boundary is going to be based on that. Do you have another question? No? Okay. Good questions. It helps me not be nervous when you ask questions. So once that urbanized area designation happens, we will have 1 year to form a metropolitan planning organization, which essentially will look at transportation infrastructure planning within that urbanized area, so some portion of the greater core area, and we'll look at road infrastructure, public transit infrastructure, and bike and pedestrian infrastructure. So, and with that planning and looking at and what are their future needs going to be, we'll have the opportunity to direct between 8 and federal funding towards transportation projects in that area. So as I said before, the MPO, what does it do? It's a planning organization. And so it's like studying population, studying infrastructure needs, looking at where we think growth is lanes needed, where is pedestrian facilities needed, and making range plans for that. It'll have the ability to direct those federal funds that right now DOT directs where no boundary. The other thing the MPO will do is it'll have much than I think any of our individual organizations maybe do when we're planning for transportation infrastructure. So there are 4 main plans, that the MPO will need to create and have the authority to direct those federal dollars. The Metropolitan Transportation Ban is the 20-year long-range transportation plan for all the infrastructure that we expect to need over the next 20 years within that MPO boundary. The Transportation Improvement Plan, which is a 4-year spending plan, so how we want to direct that $8 to $10 million annually within that boundary will be outlined in the TIP. We'll have to create a 2-year really detailed plan for how we'll spend the planning funds and then how we intend to have the construction funds spent. And then we have to have a public engagement plan or a public participation plan to make sure we're reaching all segments of our community. So how is the MPO funded? So the federal government, Federal Transportation Authority is going to, or Federal Highways Authority is going to, they give annual funds to DOT every year. I don't have all the math with me, but Fairbanks has an MPO. They've been in operation for about 10 years, and they get annually about $400,000 a year from the federal government through DOT to fund the organization. And then they also, like I said, have the authority to direct those construction project funds. So once our MPO is formed, we can expect that we'll get about $400,000 a year to hire probably 2.5 staff to create those plans. And then DOT will do the construction projects, manage the capital project funding, but they will follow. The only entities within the MPO, so all the facility, the construction by the city of Wasilla will have to come up with the 9.3% match of that project costs. And we'll talk more about that later. Let's see. So how is the MPO organized? So the MPO is governed by a policy board. And so the policy board will be made up of representatives from the Matsu Borough, the cities, DOT. Because we're in a unique situation, we have 2 tribal governments that have census designated jurisdiction within the potential MPO boundary. Both Chickaloon and Kinnick will probably be part of the MPO policy board. Because we don't operate a public transit system through the local government, it's probably going to make sense to have a public transit provider sit on the policy board, and then potentially a bike and pedestrian advocate. So the federal government does outline that at minimum, the policy board that oversees this MPO needs to be made up of representation of whoever represents 75% of the population and the largest city. So at minimum, the policy board would be the borough, DOT, and the city of Wasilla. But we think because of our unique situation, our policy board is going to be a bit bigger. So it's probably hard to see that, and I can provide copies to all of you. So right now we have a pre-policy board, which is kind of holding a place until the official policy board is formed. As you can see, there's representation from those organizations I mentioned. I just want to point out that right now the borough has 3 seats on the policy board, and all the other organizations have 1 seat. And Manager Brown, Mayor DeVries, and Deputy Manager Hayes are serving in that role. But once we form the boundary of the MPO and we know how big it is the urbanized area going to go up and include all of Fishhook? Is it going to go down all the way down Kinnick Goose Bay Road? Is it going to bump out to Big Lake? So right now we're looking at where is development happening? Where do we think it's going to go over the next 20 years? And then we're looking at population forecasting from the Department of Labor and ICER and Woods and Pool, try to make that determination of where we think the boundary should be. And then we'll probably come back to you and have conversations about and if we're going to keep the policy board representation with Mayor DeVries and Manager Brown, who from the assembly might serve, or you might decide it's going to be all assembly people, but we're going to have a chance to have that conversation again. But for now, that's kind of the placeholder. So what's been happening for the past year and a half. So knowing that this urbanized area designation was coming and we were going to have to form an MPO, we've been working behind the scenes to prepare for this new entity that none of us have been part of before. So it's DOT's responsibility to help the MPO stand up. And so for the past 3 years now, they've given us planning funds to help organize meetings and coordinate with DOT and the cities and the tribes and everyone who might be involved in this MPO in the future to kind of start this forming process. So we formed the steering committee in September of 2020, started having monthly meetings, and September of 21, we formed the pre-policy board. And since that time, we've been drafting documents at the steering committee level, which is the staff level for all the representing organizations, for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, which is that long-range plan we'll have to do in the future when we become an MPO. We drafted a strategy on how to form the boundary once we get the urbanized area designation. We've completed the public participation plan, which is one of the required plans that the MPO will have to create. We named ourselves Mat-Su Valley Planning for Transportation, so that's kind of exciting. This year, DOT, we've got a lot of work to do over the next 6 months. So how does this MPO how does it get formed? How does it become a real thing? Well, we have to produce an operating agreement that all of our representatives are in agreement on, and we have to give that to the governor of Alaska, and then they will review the operating agreement. They will review the decisions we've made, who we've seated on the policy board. They'll look at the how we want the organization to be operated and decide, Mat-Su MPO, you are now formed. So we expect to deliver that document in September and to have the form happen in March of 2023, and away we will go. So,
Deputy Mayor?
Through the mayor, does that operating agreement come before the assembly before it goes to the governor?
yeah, so what we're doing, why we're hiring an extra person right now to help is to help create that package, create all the intergovernmental agreements between the cities, the DOT, the tribes, the other organizations that are going to be involved, get the membership fees organized, the authorization to be part of this other organization, the structure. We're trying to decide, is this organization going to be a freestanding nonprofit organization, or is it going to be hosted by one of the member organizations? Once we make that decision, we have to draft the bylaws and articles of incorporation. All those details have to happen, and we'll bring that package to the assembly sometime in July, August at the latest. So you'll have an opportunity to review that. I do expect to come to you before then with an intergovernmental agreement to look at like how the borough is going to be involved in the MPO and how those match funds are going to be contributed. And so we'll have another chance to talk about the MPO. But yes, you'll have a chance to review the documents and hopefully support a resolution, provide a resolution of support to go with the operating agreement package to the governor, so they know that you all agree with the work that has been done.
Okay, follow up? No? Okay. Yes. Sir.
Through the mayor, question on the match funds. So is the MPO set up such that each organization, like NATO's in the news these days, contributes an annual fee to the match funds, or would it depend on where the project is, who owns the road? They would provide all of the 9%. Which way would it be? So kind of two parts. If the MPO ends up being a nonprofit organization, there will be a membership fee associated with belonging to the MPO, so we can create an operating reserve, because all of the funds that the MPO will get will be reimbursable. And so we'll need to have some funds set aside to be able to make payroll as we're waiting for the DOT reimbursements. And so there will be some fee associated with membership, and then there will be that annual match
like dues. So both for the match for the planning funds, so we'll have the 9% match, and so there'll be a formula for each organization based on population and infrastructure that will decrease, I think, depending on the different organization and how many facilities they have. And then for the construction projects, if DOT owns the facility and will manage the facility, they cover the match 100%. If it's one of our roads, but it's a major collector, I think, or an arterial, they pay 50%. If it's a lower local road, then we'll pay the full match for our facility, as would the cities, yeah. Does that, I can provide a table to folks after if that is
We've
helpful.
had lots of discussions on the makeup.
Okay.
And so there's, I don't know, what, 3 or 4 roughly, right? Different options that we have regarding the makeup, and that would answer those questions.
Yep. So basically the size of whoever owns the road and the size of the road they'll have a few tweaks to it when we get there.
Thank you.
Further question? Any more questions?
And other than
Okay.
that, I just wanted to, I have a typo on my slide, so that's why you don't ever let the dyslexic produce their presentation without review, but there it is for everyone to see. So again, we expect to get the package to the governor in September. We expect formation in March, and we hope to come back and talk with you all in July about next steps and to
Good evening.
Okay, so Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly, Alex Strawn, I'm the Planning Director for the borough. I think I know all of you by now. This topic of gravel permitting was put on the agenda by Assemblymember Sumner. I don't plan on having a long presentation on this. I'm just going to basically discuss the existing framework that we have right now. I will say that gravel regulations were adopted in 2005. I have been part of, I think, every amendment since then. We've adopted reclamation standards and permitting process for mining in the water table. So I do have a rich history in the code, and my office administers it. So if we can let this conversation go wherever you want it to go, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. So right now, the way it's set up, so originally it was 500 cubic feet was the threshold for needing a permit with the borough. That's a very small amount of gravel. Very quickly after 2005, when the regulations were adopted like that, like a little working group was formed, and they modified it and changed it to 2,000 cubic yards. That's the threshold at which a permit was required. And the idea was to let the small operators who are, just selling truckloads of gravel. There was a administrative permit built into the record, or into the code. It's in there right now. And essentially the way it's set up is if you have a gravel extraction operation that is either under 2 years with any quantity allowed, or up to 7,000 cubic yards per year in perpetuity. If you meet one of those criteria, then you can get an administrative permit. Generally, it's the 2-year period. It's for road projects. If there's a road project that comes, somebody applies for a permit to supply the gravel to the road project. Once we have a complete application, it's adjudicated by the planning director, and we have 30 days to do so once we have a complete application. Once you go beyond 2 years and 7,000 cubic yards, that's when a conditional use permit is required, and that's when we have to bring it to the Planning Commission for their review and decision. So I guess with that, I just want to open it up for discussion, questions, or whatever you may want to talk about.
Yes, Assemblyperson Young.
Yeah, I don't really know what direction this is going to head in. I'll let you help decide, but I'm of the belief that it should be pretty easy to get the permit, but I'm of the belief that the Matsu Borough should be able to hold people accountable if they don't do what they say what they're going to do. And I know that, you know what I'm talking about. We've got a gravel pit that's supposed to have what would we figure 400 or 500 homes around a man-made lake that's not there. And I've talked about reclamation bond requirements in the past here recently. I think they're substantially lower than they should be. It was probably a number from back in the Jonesville mine days, somewhere around 1900. Is that something, is that something that would be easy to fix and easy to change so that moving forward, again, I want it to be as easy as possible for people to get a permit. Gravel's a big part of what we do, building roads and houses. But also, could we make it easier for the borough to hold people's feet to the fire if they don't actually do what they say they're going to do when it comes time to reclamating? So I'll let you speak on that, Alex.
Yeah, so the idea of bonding and reclamation is, it can get pretty complex for sure. So, first figuring if you're going to require a bond, there's a couple of questions that you have to ask. If the idea is that you're going to bond for the, in the event that they abandon it and they don't reclaim, the cost of hiring contractors to reclaim that site, that can get pretty high. When you look at if they strip off all the topsoil, then you're looking at importing topsoil and you're looking at hydroseeding that. And that can be very expensive on, say, like a 40-acre parcel, like really, really expensive. Then there's also the question of if you do require a bond and they walk away, do they just forfeit the bond and do you actually use that to reclaim? Or are we going to hire dozers and things like that to go onto private property and use that money to reclaim? So what you're actually going to do with the bond if they fail to meet the standards is also a question that needs to be asked. Can it be done? Yes, absolutely. Places do, people, all over the nation, reclamation bonds are required.
If I could ask another question that maybe Nick could help us out with, but right now my understanding is the bond requirement is $750 an acre, I believe. Is that a state? Yeah. Now, is there any sort of state statute that would limit us from increasing that amount? Because we know for $750 an acre, that's why I said I think that number came from like the Jonesville mine days. We can't do anything for $750 an acre in today's environment. So can we increase that amount?
So I don't think there's anything in state law. Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Hello. I don't think we're preempted by state law.
Okay.
We don't have a separate additional reclamation bond in our code. The decision was made way back when to just let the state bonding requirement satisfy that. So we do not currently have in our code, I don't think, and Alex knows it better than me, but we're not preempted by state law from imposing one.
And I will say that the state's definition of reclamation is much different than ours. Ours is, you have to have 60% live cover after a few years. We have a couple different performance standards. It's essentially saying it's got to be revegetated. Whereas the state of Alaska says, if they don't have a cliff that people can fall off of, it's reclaimed. And that's literally what they say.
Yeah.
So they have much less stringent reclamation standards. And they're able, I think, to sort of play a game where you only are having to post a bond for a couple of acres at a time, even if you have a very large parcel.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead. Assembly Person Hours.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on Assemblyman Young's question kind of about reclamation. I know we had a unanimous opposition at the last Planning Commission meeting to changing the rules for permitting, and I believe the Planning Commission was unanimous in their resolution to us saying do not change the rules in terms of the 20,000 cubic yards. And I know we've gotten quite a bit of testimony lately about gravel pits, including lack of reclamation and water table issues. I just wondered to staff, do we know how many pits in the map 2 have actually been either reclaimed at this point or reclaimed into the point where they went back and did get their reclamation bond back from the state?
So I don't think that getting the reclamation bond back from the state is a difficult thing to do, considering their very low standard for what is reclaimed. So when the reclamation standards were initially adopted, it allowed a 5-year period to establish, once an area is closed, to establish revegetative standard, the reclamation standards. So there is a game that can be played where, a gravel operator can say, oh, this area is still open. We're still actively mining from that area. So since that phase hasn't been closed, then the standard, the time doesn't start for reclamation. A lot of the complaints that we get regarding reclamation are on grandfathered pits or pits with pre-existing legal non-conforming status. And they do not have the same standard that permitted pits have. They actually just really need to slope it to basically be the angle of repose and to get rid of junk vehicles are their two major standards that they have for grandfathered pits. So I hope I answered your question with that. If I didn't, please let me know.
Follow up?
No, I
Assemblyperson
appreciate the answer. I think maybe a follow-up at some point to take a look at how many have actually followed through on reclamation would be great. But thank you, that was a good answer.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, yeah, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so through the mayor, more of a comment really. So the Planning Commission is an advisory body. So I think there were a number of gravel amendments to the permitting ordinance that were proposed and came before the Planning Commission. But I would encourage the Planning Commission as an advisory body to not solely just vote up or down ordinances, but potentially they should consider constructively adding feedback to the ordinances that are coming through, because you're not actually a decision-making body on code, but you could have constructive feedback that may propose amendments or changes to what comes through. And I think right now, in light of the tens of millions of dollars of road projects that we passed bonds and authorized for, and fuel costs no doubt heading to the moon, that we should really consider adding more gradation in our gravel permitting process so that we can encourage a number of smaller pits to come online that may be closer located to our road projects, or else we may not be able to stretch our dollar very far on the 60-something million dollars of road projects we're doing over the next few years. So, I mean, that's just one consideration, but also in the private sector, it's going to probably be necessary as trucking gets very, very expensive. So I would encourage the Planning Commission in review of these proposed ordinances, and quite possibly some of them are very bad ideas, but maybe there's a different idea that would be a good idea, and don't be afraid to propose those. So, thank you.
Further questions or comments? Okay. Assemblyperson Hale, do you have any comments? Okay, I guess we'll go on. All righty. Are you ready to, are you the jump to or the next program? Are you ready to jump to the next item?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go for it.
So the next item is the subdivision construction manual. And this is, so 2 years ago, a lot of things happened 2 years ago. 2020 was a big year for adopting things. But we had a subdivision construction manual rewrite, which was the first time it had been done in 30 years. It was an exhaustive effort. There was a lot of meetings with a lot of with people with different backgrounds and fields of expertise. And eventually they came up with a document that came before this board and was approved. Recently, so we adopted it knowing that we might, we're going to work with it for a little bit, and then we might need to make some modifications to it. So after working with it for 2 years, staff has identified some changes that really should occur. And then people from the development community has also identified their own changes that they think should occur. So we put together a smaller working group for a smaller amount of time this time and developed a list of changes that we're still kind of working on. We hope to have a draft really soon and then bring before this board in hopefully like midsummer to early fall. It has some it has a lot of cleanup in it. It has, it changes the warranty period, which is going to work out better for the borough as well as for developers. It changes the drainage requirements. One of the big ones is that allows drainage basins within utility easements, which was a big request of the developers. We worked with MEA and came up with language that they can live with. And so overall, I think it's going to be a really good change. It shouldn't be controversial because I think it's all good changes that everybody agrees that need to happen. So.
Questions? Yes, go ahead, Assemblyperson Young.
Through the mayor, so timing wise, and I think that's totally reasonable. You guys are doing an awesome job on this, and I really do appreciate what you're doing. But there are, like the warranty period cleanup and then the MEA stuff, those are really big things, right? And so I personally know of multiple developers holding subdivisions right now to turn in, hopeful that could be done prior to this, because especially with the drainage side of things and being able to work with MEA now and actually put those in the easement, that's a big deal. So is there a memo or something that could go out? I heard that there might be one coming where a memo to staff that even though it's not adopted, these changes would be acceptable on a subdivision turned in, say if it was turned in tomorrow. I mean, is that something that we can do for private sector to help with that?
So the subdivision construction manual is adopted by the assembly and referenced in code.
Yeah.
I think it'd be very difficult for us to say we're going to go off something on speculation that the assembly might adopt it. Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a difficult lift right there. And I think Nick is shaking his head. I think that when it comes time where we're putting it through the public process, and we plan on bringing it to long range or the local road service area advisory board, the transportation advisory board, plating board, planning commission, and eventually to the assembly. And if leading up to that, it's looking like it's going through the process, and somebody wants to submit something at the risk that it might not get adopted, they probably could do that depending on the timing. But I don't think that we can operate on a document that hasn't been adopted yet because it's in code.
Yeah, and so, okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Assemblyman Hale.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I had a question. So over the last few weeks, we've had a lot of discussion about non-conforming roads and impassable roads and roads that are not up to borough standard. And, the subdivision construction manual has some rules about what you have to do to build your road. There, theoretically would prevent more of these substandard roads from being built and having lots sold off of these substandard roads. What does the enforcement of that look like, and how do we make sure moving forward that we don't have situations where all of a sudden we're looking at a substandard road and people are clamoring at us to get some maintenance on it when we can't maintain it because it's substandard?
So I think the short end, I do have our plating officer here if we get too technical on me here, but I think that the answer is that right now, if the road isn't developed to our standards, the plat doesn't record and the lots can't be sold off. It's as simple as that. So, yeah.
So we have enough personnel inspecting these new roads before they go to the planning board that kind of situation is much less likely to happen in the future. Then is that correct?
Yeah, so there's a period of time where the borough accepted roads that were not developed to standards. I don't know if it was political pressures or what it was, but we've accepted a lot of roads that are not built to our standards, that have drainage issues and all sorts of issues. we don't do that anymore. We do have just one engineer who's going out and inspecting all these things, and she is very busy, and that's actually the subdivision construction manual update is on her desk right now. She is a very busy person, but she seems to be keeping up with everything as far as on the subdivision side of things.
Awesome. So my understanding of the reason that we accepted all those roads was that at the time, the state was paying us per mile for those roads. So we were just like, yeah, this is a road, that's a road, this four-wheeler track over here, this is a road too. So hopefully we can kind of get that whole situation straightened out and maybe get some of these substandard roads improved to the point where folks who are paying RSA taxes can actually enjoy the benefits of paying those RSA taxes.
Okay. Assemblyperson Yuan and then Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, just so too many people out there don't think we're building a bunch of bad roads. The last subdivision construction manual was written in 1993, and really we've been building some really good roads since then. The ones that are causing us heartache and are a real maintenance problem are ones that were built before then. This rewrite in 2020, it took a couple years to get it done, but it increased cul-de-sac size from 80 to 88 feet, needed to be done to help the fire department out. There'll be no more 20-foot roads. I mean, it made some changes, but they're very positive changes. But it's not that we're magically now going to be building good roads. So, and as time goes by, hopefully those will get fixed. So that's all I got.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, through the mayor to the assembly member from District 1, I might point out though, so we're not going to be assuming maintenance of any substandard roads through our subdivision process. And we don't assume maintenance of condo plat roads, but there is actually no review by the borough or apparently by the state on condo plats. So if the borough were politically pressured to assume maintenance of condo plat roads in the future, then you may have those issues, but not through the subdivision process.
Further questions or comments?
Madam Mayor.
Yes. Assemblyperson Hours, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just more of a comment. I have heard of several instances of drainage issues related to subdivisions and roads that have been constructed post 1993. So it seems like we're still having some issues. And I just say it as a comment. I know we have a road task force, and that might be something that we want to look into just in terms of how those things might be addressed in the revisions or otherwise.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? All righty, on to the next item, sir.
This is on the air quality ordinance and monitoring equipment location, and planner Ted Eichscheid is going to be delivering this presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Planning Commission and Assembly, staff colleagues, and members of the public here and out there. My name is Ted Eichscheid. I am the senior planner and being the oldest planner in our planning division, and also most senior. I've been here just a little over 4 years. I was asked to talk about air quality a bit because I was here when that was the most recent code ordinance was developed. So I'll try to give you a little background. And then I think I have to point this at you. So a little update here. So first of all, what's wrong with the air, right? We live in a beautiful place, by and large with good quality air. But we, as it is well known, we do have some issues with dust. That's called particulate matter. Usually that's in the spring and the fall when things dry out and we get windy days. And as was mentioned before, I think by one of the members of the public, even though that's not good for you, we don't regulate the glacial dust and silt. So that's probably a good thing. It's just something we live with. We do issue an advisory when it's really bad so that people that might be affected by that are aware of that. The other type of air quality issue is what we call fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, and that's mostly from combustion products. But also we have some issues here in the Mat-Su in certain areas where we have unusual geographic and climate effects that allow these combustion products to build up. A classic example is the Butte area, surrounded by mountains. We get a cold air inversion in the winter. We have this very cold, stagnant air. At a wood fire and you see the smoke go up and it stops and starts spreading out. So in those situations, this fine particulate matter can build up. And indeed, sometimes we actually violate national air quality standards for both those entities. One, the dust, EPA doesn't regulate that in any sense because you can't regulate nature, but the fine particulates, they do. I'll get into that. Have to have the right key. I was asked to summarize this new air quality code. It's 8.75. It's actually a fairly readable code. So I think one of the members of the public said to read it, and I'd encourage you to read it. It's not too long. First of all, it was approved March of 2019. So by my math, I think that was 3 years ago, it went into effect. Its intent was to reduce these fine particulates. I mentioned PM 2.5. And there was a couple reasons for that. First of all, those fine particulates are bad for human health. And so the science is pretty well documented, has many of the same effects as breathing smoke. And breathing smoke specifically like cigarette smoke. They're very fine particles. And the dust, we've all been through the dust thing. It's kind of an irritant. It's more impactful on certain populations. Well, the fine particulates, you breathe them in, and because they are fine, they go deeper into your lungs, into your bloodstream. They actually somewhat plug up your lungs and make your heart work harder. So apparently it has an impact on healthy people, but it has a specific impact on certain compromised populations. The second goal was, besides health, was to stay in compliance with the Clean Air Act. And I'll get into that in a moment, but these fine particulates, when you exceed the national air quality standards, not only does it have an impact on health, but it means that at some point EPA will come in and start regulating you and forcing you to get those down. And a classic example of that is the Fairbanks North Star Borough situation. They've been in non-attainment status for fine particulates since 2009, and they still are in non-attainment status, a little bit infamously. And then basically the code, what it does is when we have exceeded the fine particulate standard, that we will suspend outdoor burning in the Butte Community Council area. And of course, a question I anticipate is how often have we done that since we instituted this code ordinance in March of 2019? We did it one for a 6-day period. I believe it was January 6th to 12th, 2020. And there were no issues with non-compliance during that time. So it seemed to work, and that's the only time that we've had that situation.
You've been shot.
It's kind of a passive aggressive thing here. I'm sorry. I was a teacher, so I have to think about these things. I was asked to present some data, and there's lots of ways to do that. So you have a table, and on the table it has a listing from left to right. It has a listing of the year from 2012 through 2020. It has a number of days that we exceeded that 24 average standard for this fine particulates, PM 2.5. I have something called a 98th percentile value. Let's not worry about that too much. It has something called the design value. Interesting terminology, but I do want to come back to that. And then it has the air quality standard for PM 2.5, the combustion products, 35. So if you look on the far, what you want to focus on is those far number is 35, and I highlighted 2016 in yellow. And you will see that this design value was 35.1. So the design value is basically the 3 previous years' average value for this 98th percentile. You can check the math if you want. And if you exceed the 35 standard on the far right, with this design value, you are in non-attainment status. You are Fairbanks. Means you have unhealthy air, and EPA is going to come in and institute a bunch of measures to get your air quality better. So you might look at 2016 and say, aha, we were in trouble that year. And I would say actually the 35.1 rounds down to what whole number? 35. So as it's written in the Clean Air Act, we actually just were at the standard, but we're very close. And that's probably what really instituted some of these efforts to change code, so that when the air was already bad, we could minimize bad contributions to already bad air. The other thing I'd like you to note is on the bottom of that table in the orange. And if you look at the far right number, I think it says 30.1. That's the design value. So you can see that's a 9-year average. That's an average 2012 to 2020 of the air quality as measured at the one air quality monitor in the Butte area. And it shows that, yeah, we're below the standard in the long-term average, but not by a lot. So that's a cautionary tale. The good news is, going back up and looking at that yellow line, and again, looking at design value, the second from the right, you see that we've been well below the standard. So the air seems to be okay. Even though I would say 30 as a long-term average is not great, but we've come the top half above the yellow, the air was worse. Below the yellow line, the air for these fine particulates is not so bad. So that's some good news.
Yes, Assemblyperson Yount, go ahead.
Sorry, if you could please back that up one. The last 3 years is 24.3, which it seems to me like considerably less than 35. And so looking at 18, 19, 20, sorry.
Mhm.
So the average of those 3 years would be 24.3. Is there anything that you could credit for the drop? It seems like it's a 35% drop from previous 3-year averages. So
Yes, I anticipate this question, as a good planner should, and I don't really have an answer for you. I mean, if you look at this closely, the ordinance was not passed until March of 2019. I put that information on there. So it seems like even before that, the air quality started to improve. So I can suggest some possible reasons. Our winters may not have been as cold. I haven't looked at the climatology on that. We do know that, the weather by and large has been getting warmer. And I mentioned this is really an issue in the winter, November through February, in certain areas on cold, still days.
Inversions.
Yeah, inversions. So it may be climatology. It may be some of the outreach. It may be some of the buzz that the air quality ordinance debate generated. People became kind of aware. And I do know that when we had that one outdoor burn suspension, we went out in the Butte area and it's like, okay, are people observing it? Are they following it? We had done the notice and there was no issues. I think people were really aware. So
you know what I think's helping?
What?
LIDs. So people that burn wood should be allowed to, but I just want to say the gas LID process might be helping. Do you really think in Fairbanks? So Fairbanks, there's a lot of people that burn wood.
Yes, they don't have many options.
I know the Fairbanks community very well. They don't have a lot of natural gas up there. They do have some pellet fired boilers, but what is the root cause of Fairbanks issues, do you believe? And what is their number? How high above 35? Do you know that?
So I don't know what their numbers are, but they're, from my reading, it is burning wood.
Yeah.
They have the same issues with inversions. They have a lot more people with wood stoves. And they have, as you already suggested, fewer heating options. Unfortunately, they've not been able to really shake that. One of the things that has happened is, I guess there's been about a $14 million grant from EPA to do a wood burner stove change-out program, trying to replace one of the more inefficient ones with more efficient ones, but they are still having issues. They really could use another source for heat, like natural gas.
Yeah, and I think naturally we're going to see this. My guess is in the next 3 years, we'll watch a trend downward even more because there was a lot of energy rebate program. If you look at this, when oil prices dropped, we were able to maintain, I say we, I'm actually the president of the state home builders right now. So we were able to keep the state of Alaska funding energy rebates in, anybody that would apply for it and could prove that they were making their home more energy efficient with their different processes. There's a million different ways, but they could be given money, right? That actually just dried up a few years ago, but I'm sure a lot of those got done out there. There was quite a bit of that. And then, like I said, every year more and more natural gas becomes available to homes that didn't have it before. So I just wanted to point out the last 3 years were substantially lower than the 35, and I think we're headed in the right direction. I don't think it has anything to do with anything this body's ever done previous to this or may do in the future. I think it's just natural conditions of things becoming more affordable for people to hook up gas to their house, which is awesome. But I do want to say, for anybody that's burning wood, I hope that we're not, and I haven't read it, like the gentleman said earlier. I need to read it because I want to make sure we're not ever trying to single out anybody that is still on a wood stove. They need to be able to keep doing that. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, go ahead.
So what does that mean if you become non-attainment for this fine particulate? Well, it has an impact on health, as I said, but the process is, and this is the Fairbanks experience. So 2009, they were classified as being non-attainment. So EPA says, okay, you, Fairbanks, and the state have 3 years to come up with an improvement plan. So they did that. And then once they have an improvement plan, they then try to improve the air quality to meet the standard. Fairbanks still has issues, probably for some of the reasons that Assemblyperson Yount just mentioned. There are other issues if you are non-compliant and you just say, well, we're not going to do this plan, we're just not going to do it. There are implications for federal funds for like highways and that. The federal government has ways to deal with that, as well as permitting, improving permits. So, I know there's several projects around the borough. West Susitna Access Road is starting to kind of ramp up, and that's going to require some federal permits. So if the Mat-Su Borough was ever non-attainment, the permitting authorities would have to say, okay, is this project going to cause air quality problems or add to the problem that's been identified? Once you do attain the National Air Quality Standard, I'm on the third bullet here, then they put you on like a 20-year probation. I call it a probation. So you're in attainment, but they keep an eye on it. And then the Clean Air Act does allow citizens to file suit. And I believe there was a group, Earth Justice, I believe, filed suit against DEC and EPA about the Fairbanks issue and won some kind of decision. American Lung Association Alaska report card, they reported about 22% of Mat-Su Borough residents had some would be impacted by bad air quality. Things like asthma, COPD, things of that sort. It's expensive if you do become in non-attainment status. One of the things I understand is North Star Fairbanks Borough, when we were researching this ordinance back in 2017, said they had a staff of 9 working on air quality within their borough. That's a lot of people. That's more than we have in our planning division. Apparently that was air quality as a person communication. And the other thing, I guess, is something that I just was brought to my attention by my supervisor, Kim Solian. So EPA is looking at these air quality standards. And I mentioned the 35, remember, for the fine particulates. So EPA is looking at those, looking to see if they need to be revised. The assumption is they'd be revised downward because the World Health Organization has a lower standard. And just to give you a little history, the standard for these fine particulates used to be 65 micrograms per cubic meter. 65, not 35. Then 2006, they went down to 35. So I want you just to remember that 30 number, even though that it's been trending downward, that's the 9-year average. It's at 30 right now. So who knows what EPA will do, but I have on there, they're expected to issue a proposed rule this summer and a final rule next spring. But you know how government works, very slow. I've always wanted to say that.
Except when you don't want it to move slow.
Yeah, so as a teacher, I had like 9 months to deliver a curriculum, and I tried to go as fast as I could, but as good as I could. So anyways, current air quality projects of interest. The first one is the Butte Air Quality Monitor. There's one regulatory air quality monitor in Homatsu Borough. It's on Harrison Court. Some people said it's put in the worst place, and they are right. EPA requires it to be put in a place with the worst air quality. DEC has listened to some neighbor concerns, and they are in the second winter of a relocation study. So they've been setting up some temporary air quality monitors. This winter, they have identified 2 sites, the Plant Material Center and Butte Elementary, that they're doing additional data collection. And those sites have to be as bad, air quality wise, as the one on South Harrison Court. And if it is within certain parameters, then they may make the case to EPA to move that air quality monitor. Second bullet, we've been working with our IT department and also DEC to come up with an automated air quality alert system so that we don't have to go and look online, but we'll just flash up on the borough's webpage with some possible future phones. That's an option we're looking at. So if you sign up, you things, I very much like them. And then DEC just let us know that they are expanding their network of what they call non-regulatory air quality monitoring, and they hope to add some up here. Those are things, you know, they just require a pole somewhere and some 110 voltage, and they're just designed to help citizens know what the air quality is. Nothing regulatory. So they're writing a grant for that. And then I did have a thank you. I did have our web link there. It's easy to remember, matsuair.com. And our webpage on air quality, I think, is pretty well constructed. And it takes something that is a pretty complex topic sometimes and hopefully makes it understandable. So matsuair.com.
Any parting questions that you have?
Yes,
Sure. Go ahead.
Madam Mayor. So on
Madam Mayor?
the third bullet
Okay.
here, is there any upside to DEC monitoring these other locations? I mean, there's no requirements there now, but if they exceed the 35, don't we have more non-attainment areas?
So the key there, through the mayor, good question. The key there is non-regulatory monitors. So, you know, it depends on, you know, how much you trust the government and whether you think this would be a value to citizens just to know what the air quality is. I know we did have some people upset when the one right behind us at the Ball Diamonds was removed later in 2019. DEC removed it, the Palmer Air Quality Monitor. It was for 2 reasons. It cost money. You know, that was a big one. It wasn't one of these little ones. And it also never really showed any violations. So they said, well, why are you going to pay for this? And we did get some, you know, contacts from the public. Some people are concerned about that because, you know, believe it or not, teachers, coaches use some of that information. And some people in Wasilla say, well, the Butte's way over there. So there was, you know, some concern about that. But, you know, I can't really answer your question with any certainty. It's the government, and it depends on how you feel about the government. But they are non-regulatory, and they do cost money. And, you know, there's no reporting of it to EPA like there is with the Butte one.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, you had a question, sir?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
then-
so the reason I had this put on the agenda is because I was interested in the effort to relocate this air monitor. As I recall from the public testimony, there was a number of folks, including the neighbor, who were testifying essentially that the exceedances corresponded with their use of their burn barrel or burning slash right next to the air monitor. So if that's the case, then, you know, we almost entered into non-attainment status, not really because of a measurement of the entire air quality of the Butte, but really like the next door neighbor burning stuff right next to the air monitor. And I don't think that's really what it's designed to be measuring. So relocating it to Butte Elementary, where nobody's going to be burning a burn barrel or slash right next to it, I think is a good idea here. And I was hoping to get an update on when that relocation study would be completed. And
So they haven't given me any updates, but I believe last year it went through March. You know, they kind of go through that October to March. You know, they're trying to capture the whole winter season, but I have not received any update. I know they're going to give me a design value later this week for the Butte air quality monitor where it sits now for 2021. It takes them a while to generate that, but I don't have any specific about that at this time.
and if I might, that also might explain the drop off in the exceedances, because when this all started to become a large factor and we almost reached non-attainment, you know, then the neighbor became aware that that his burning next to the monitor maybe was causing the borough to almost enter non-attainment. So, and then subsequently has fallen off. But yeah, I do think that, you know, to prevent that particular issue in the future, we really ought to move that thing.
Yeah, if I may, through the mayor, I think DEC did hear the neighbor concerns, and, you know, getting back to that skepticism about government, I thought they were trying to be responsive to that. So we'll see where their study goes. I think the wild card that, you know, policy members have to keep in mind is what EPA decides this summer for the proposed rule. Something to keep an eye on.
Assembly, I'm sorry.
Madam Mayor.
Yep. I was just checking to see if Deputy Mayor had a follow-up. Yes, sir. Assembly Member Hale, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to say, I think that, you know, back when this was all being discussed, whether or not to actually adopt this ordinance or not, there was a whole lot of controversy surrounding it. And I think that also contributed to the fact that we haven't had a lot of bad air days in the Butte. I can tell you, you know, prior to this, there were times when I'd wake up in the morning and I'd look out over the valley, and you know, you couldn't hardly see the trees for the smoke, and we haven't had those kind of days in several years. And I think a lot of the controversy surrounding this kind of worked to educate some folks about, you know, not burning when it's 15 below and there's no wind. But I just want to, you know, make sure everybody here understands that, you know, this in no way impacts folks who have wood stoves. The ordinance specifically guarantees the right to use a wood stove for heat in your home. And, you know, over the last 3 years that this has been in place, we've had, 6 days of what's known as an outdoor burn ban, which is basically the exact same thing that the forestry department does in the summertime when you have high wildfire problems. And I got to tell you, I haven't heard any complaints from anyone who lives in the Butte Community Council area about this ordinance since it's been passed. It's very non-intrusive. It doesn't bother anyone. And now we all know better than to burn our burn barrels when it's 15 below and no wind.
Okay, thank you. Any final,
Yeah,
yes.
through the mayor.
Mhm, yeah.
I have a company in Palmer at the airport here. We have an air service, and I am far more concerned about the silt flying in. In the spring, we're just getting buried in it. And I'm wondering if there's any efforts being made for dust control.
Through the mayor, none that I'm aware of, but I do get complaints every spring about dust issues, and not from the winds, you know, the classic glacial winds, but I have had, you know, say 5 or 6 over the last couple of years where people have contacted our office and they talk to me and they're concerned about dust from parking lots, you know, after spring breakup. There's a lot of people are bothered by that, but you know, we haven't tried to control Mother Nature yet.
It's coming straight up off the riverbed right here. It's really bad. We're right in the zone, right? This building is, you know, it plumes right through here. And it seems like it's gotten worse to me. And I actually do about 14,000 acres of dust control in Tucson for Freeport McMoran mining every year. And we actually glue the dirt down with pine pitch and do it as well for Red Dog mine. And I mean, they'd be fined terrifically if they put up with it, you know, if we had as much dirt flying as we do here in Palmer. So anyway, it's doable. I fly over it and see it all the time. So anyway, that's all I have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions or comments before we move on? Ready, sir? Hi. Yes, sir.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Matsuair.com.
Okay. You got it all primed for you, so go for it, sir.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly. Once again, Alex Strawn, Planning Director for the Borough. 2 years ago, the Borough adopted regulations for outdoor shooting ranges. It applies to commercial shooting ranges, educational shooting ranges, and nonprofit shooting ranges, only ones that are outdoors. It's a fairly simple permit process that is ultimately adjudicated by the planning director and myself. The idea being that it didn't need to go to the planning commission because there's not a lot of discretion involved. It does require a permit application with some engineering to ensure that, like, the backstops are built to prevent ricochet, that it's designed in a manner that stray bullets are not going to fall onto homes. It does have a hours of operation requirement. It requires 1,000-foot distance from the firing point to the nearest habitable structure. And it does have a noise requirement of 90 decibels for habitable structures that are nearby. There's been a lot of discussion about, a lot of testimony over time about the decibel limit. And that's been a sort of a sticking point for a lot of people. The argument being that 90 decibels is about what a vacuum cleaner, the noise a vacuum cleaner makes, whereas a rifle makes a lot louder noise. I think that the thing to understand, though, is that guns may have a very high decibel right from the muzzle, right from the end of the barrel. But if you imagine being at your house trying to sleep and somebody's running a vacuum cleaner on your deck is what 90 decibels would be. So it's measured. Most of our noise regulations are measured from a property line. This is actually measured from the actual habitable structure itself. But as you know, there is legislation to repeal it, and the Planning Commission has talked about it and did not adopt a resolution. They actually failed a resolution saying what they didn't want. But I guess I'll just answer any questions that you have about the ordinance or about how it's being administered.
Yeah, it's scheduled to be on a public hearing on the 15th, which is a week from tonight. Yeah. Any questions, comments? Yes, sir, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, and this is perhaps more for the Assembly. I'm new to chair. I'm learning. I'm a slow learner. Of the Planning Commission. And if I say anything the other commissioners don't agree with, please step forward. But I think our view was, in general, we agreed that there needs to be some regulation. This is certainly an activity that impacts neighborhoods. We personally, I'd rather have a gravel pit next to me, a marijuana establishment than a shooting range. And I've lived close to shooting ranges before. So we feel like there needs to be some regulation. But the concern was, until we have something that addresses the, not one size fits all, let's not repeal it. Let's come up with something to replace it before we just throw the whole thing in the can. And it's on me that we didn't develop a resolution like that to clearly say, kind of what our thoughts were. We're not saying that this is perfect. It seems reasonable for certain areas, but we agree that there's other areas of the borough where this is not needed.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the Assembly or Planning Commission? Oh, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd say in that regard, I think it's certainly very reasonable in high density areas to have, permitting requirements to maintain public safety. My real concern with that is that in the lower density areas, what you have is, if you don't make it easy for people to create commercial shooting ranges, what you have is people just going out like Jonesville and shooting and leaving, clutter and just generally being unsafe. So I think and to apply that borough-wide with those same standards, I think is going to have a negative impact overall, because really nobody is likely, I think, in a high density like core area to say, I'm going to take this 200 acres or 180 acres or whatever. And I think that the highest and best use for this land is a shooting range, because they're probably going to subdivide it and, turn it into lots and make a heck of a lot more money that way. So where you're going to get the shooting ranges is out in the lower density areas anyway. But we're essentially discouraging with the permitting process. And then what you'll end up getting is just people going out and shooting in areas like Jonesville. So I think it's ill-advised to have a permitting scheme that applies borough-wide when we have such a variance in density, population density. So.
Okay. Assemblyperson Yon.
I'm kind of hoping we could save all this for next week, but it's going to be a long night next week, and we'll have a lot of good discussion. But I just want to touch on a couple of things. There's like Stafford was saying, right? There's a lot of good parts of this legislation. There's hours of operation. Private sector already takes care of a lot of this before any of this was ever created. Anybody who wants to open a shooting range has to have what? To have a business insurance, right? Well, your insurance company is not going to give you a policy if you don't have a safety plan anyways, right? So some of these things are already being taken care of. I have major heartburn with the 90 decibel thing, and I had that before being elected and campaigned on it and blah, 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 but I'll save that for next week. But definitely, I'll just leave it at this. There's a lot of good pieces to this. It probably needs cleaned up, but that's to be determined. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Any further questions or comments from planning, zoning members or assembly? Okay, I guess we're ready to move on to the last item then, sir.
Okay, the grand finale.
Was that intentional?
No. Should have some fireworks, yeah. So I do want to thank Assemblymember Sumner for putting this on the agenda. It's not every day that the planning director gets to stand up before these boards and freely talk about zoning. So I do appreciate this opportunity. Talk about what zoning is. I mean, zoning can look a lot of different ways. There's books and books written on different types of zoning, and there's a million different ways you can go about zoning. But when it really boiled down, it's just like identifying areas on a map that have particular rules to that area. That's what it is. That's what zoning is. We do have zoning in the borough, and we've had it since 1965. Shortly after we incorporated in 1964, we formed the Planning Commission, who was doing plating at the time, but we started adopting zoning districts like the Nancy Lake State Rec area. There's a zoning district there that has essentially, uses that are allowed, uses that require a permit, and uses that are prohibited. That's most of our zoning ordinances. That's the crux of it, but there's maybe a little bit of development standards put in there as well. We do have an industrial district down at the port, and the port actually has a commercial district in there also. So we have specific zoning down there. This is a zoomed in map of our zoning districts. So of course the 3 cities have zoning within those. And at one point, like the Palmer was not, they didn't have their own zoning powers. The borough administered that, and it was just a special land use district, just like Talkeetna is right now. And the borough administered and enforced that. Then they became a city, and they actually adopted their own zoning powers. We have, if you were to zoom in closer on those red dots, you'd see that those are residential districts where communities have sort of formed together and asked the borough to zone them so that they have protections as a residential area. And then as you zoom out, these are more zoning districts that we have as far as East Glacier View up to Denali State Park. Talkeetna has very specific zoning in their town there. And then as far south as the port. This is sort of a zoning overlay. This is an area we've identified on the map where we say that if you do any use that produces a certain amount of noise or traffic, or if you're handling explosives or things like that, it requires a conditional use permit. It's like an additional restriction that we don't have in other places in the borough. So we do have zoning. Yes.
Assemblyperson Young, go ahead.
May I please, and I didn't want to do this, touch on the rifle range ordinance or gun range ordinance thing again, but in this area, there's already things that exist. If somebody tried previous to the rifle ordinance or the gun ordinance, right? Previous to that, if somebody had tried to put one in here, would it have already, they would have had to have hours of operations of different things already, right? In this core area.
Yeah, so it's not an ideal, it's not written perfectly. So we did have an example of the machine gun rental place that was going to go in, actually they did go in out by the hospital, and the neighbors kind of threw a fit. It was brought to my attention. I contacted the owner and I said, hey, I just want to let you know that if you're exceeding this noise threshold, a core area conditional use permit is going to be required. The problem with the way the ordinance is written, it doesn't have specific standards for approval that really apply very well to different types of uses. So whereas shooting ranges, you might be concerned about lead contamination, right? But there's no standard for review of lead contamination in there. So yes, if they did exceed the thresholds, then they would have to go get a conditional use permit, and the planning commission would decide on, they may put reasonable restrictions or whatever. But yeah, that is the case right now.
And just so I'm aware, because I didn't know before, but that core area conditional use permit, what is the sound ordinance on that? What's the restriction on that?
I don't know that offhand. It's Title 17.61. I believe there's a table, and it depends on the land use of the receiving land use. Okay. So that's another, you have to be in use to determine whether you're actually going to need a permit. It's kind of a weird, normally we say this use requires a permit. In this case, they have to sort of go operate, measure themselves to see if they actually need a permit or not. So that's another sort of goofy thing about the way the regulations are set up.
And then with that permit, is there hours? So you're not exactly sure in 17.61 what the decibel limit would be, but is there hours of operation in that permit already?
I can see that Nick has it pulled up right now.
Sorry.
So I was right. There is a table It's a little bit complicated here. So there's a table and it does depend on the adjacent land use. So if you're measuring from a parcel that has a house on it, there's a different standard than if there's a commercial as opposed or an industrial use. They all have different standards. If it's an industrial use, then they have a lower standard, and if it's a higher standard if it's residential. It depends, but there are hours of operation. Daytime, Friday 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Friday 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. on weekends. And then it says night, Monday through Friday, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Oh. Okay. That's for residential, and then for commercial, it's.
I imagine residential would be the most restrictive.
Yes, and typically that's probably what, there's not a whole lot of industrial uses around that are going to complain about the noise.
I apologize. I didn't mean to make you have to go through it all. I was just surprised to hear that some of that already existed in the core area previous to the shooting range.
And I've been here for 15 years. I've never seen a core area conditional use permit process for exceeding the noise thresholds. I've seen it for traffic, but not noise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, one follow-up question on those noise thresholds in 61. Are those measured at a structure or at the property line?
It's at the property line. But, typically our code enforcement officer is going to go talk to the landowner and set it up on their deck. We're not going to go walk out we could, I guess, walk out into the woods and establish on the property line, but typically we're going to establish it in the area where they're actually hearing the noise.
Okay. Any further questions or comments? Okay, all right, thank you, sir. The next item on our agenda is Mayor, Assembly, Planning Commission, and staff
Mayor.
comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not done yet.
Oh, you're not done?
No, I'm not. That was just a question. Yeah.
Well, it's time for you to be done. No.
I could. We could call it. We could adjourn if you want.
We can take a vote. My apologies, sir. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm going to go over some challenges with our current zoning. It's really not the most efficient way to do zoning. So we have a list of uses that, so most areas are a general use zone, right? Most areas are not encapsulated in one of those special land use districts or residential land use districts. They're just sort of a general use area where you can pretty much do everything you want. But if you're going to do something that the assembly has identified has uses that sort of spill out into neighboring properties or cause some sort of public nuisance, then you have to get a conditional use permit with the borough. It's not the most efficient way to do it. And one of the problems with it is it causes uncertainty for people who want to invest in these different types of uses, because they sort of have to throw themselves at the mercy of the Planning Commission, right? So I think a good example of, and this is not quite correct, not all land uses in the land in the borough's general use, most of the land in the borough's general use. But I think a good example of how our zoning ordinance is not the most efficient is when we were writing the rules for the marijuana regulations. The message I got from the Planning Commission and the Assembly is we want to keep retail facilities out of residential areas and in commercial areas. In fact, early in the process, we had somebody who was coming in to get a permit to plop a retail facility right in the middle of Willowa subdivision. And, I told him that probably wasn't going to fly. But so if we had commercial uses and residential, or if we had commercial districts and residential districts, then they would know where they need to go. They'd go to the commercial district and say, I know I'm allowed to go here. They'd see the residential areas and say, I can't go there. Instead, we sort of drag every one of them in. We put them before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission decides whether the area that they're going in is conducive to commercial use or not. It's inefficient. It does invite subjectivity, and it's definitely staff intensive. Second thing, there's a platting and land use disconnect. So let's see if, okay. So when a developer comes in to go through a subdivision process, we sort of have a one-size-fits-all subdivision process because we don't ask what the land. So when a developer comes in to go through a subdivision process, we sort of have a one-size-fits-all subdivision process because we don't ask what the use is going to be, type of subdivision. Whereas, and often neighbors, because they don't know what the land use is going to be, they're scared it's going to be something other than single family residential. They're scared there's going to be detached fourplexes or some sort of development that creates more traffic, typically, is the main concern than if it was just a single family. This is an example of a development. On the left hand is what the platting board sees, and on the right hand is after it's been platted and it's been developed. It's possible that they would have created would have required a higher standard road if they would have known that much traffic is going to go there. They may have required some connectivity. So there is a disconnect with land use and the platting process that could potentially solved through zoning. And then assurances for commercial investment. One of the complaints that I get, we get a lot of phone calls from developers and things. One of the complaints I get we'll get calls from big developers, and they'll say, zoning, if you're going to create this amount of traffic, you have to come in and get a conditional use permit. And there's not a lot of assurance to somebody who's going to invest a lot of money outside the cities in a place where they're going to be welcome to go. Strategic plan, the Assembly recently adopted the strategic plan that says that we want economic growth and diversification, and we want to manage growth. Likewise, we did an assessment of all of our comprehensive plans and found some of the same themes in the comprehensive plans that really this community has seen a lot of growth. They want us to manage the growth. They want us to provide opportunities for economic diversification and efficient transportation network, and to protect private property rights as well. So if we did want to go down the road of more comprehensive zoning, I'm just priming the pump for you guys here. Some of the low-hanging fruit that we could do is look at areas that are clearly residential. They've been developed as residential. They're intended to be residential, and they're perfectly happy to be residential, and zone them residential. Then we at least know in that area that's residential. Right now, a chlorine plant could go in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's not on our list. And so when people call and say, what are you going to do about it? I'd say nothing. They can do it. It's not on our list. If we were to take residential areas and zone them residential, that would offer them protections that we could ensure that incompatible land uses don't go within those neighborhoods. I think another opportunity that these boards might want to consider is protecting our intersections. So some of our intersections, we're actually reviewing a conditional use permit for a fairly controversial gas station at an intersection. It's actually the intersection at the corner of Trunk and Palmer Fishhook. And one of our planning commissioners said we sort of have this zoning by capitalism system going on right now. And it got a lot of laughs, but it was actually a pretty powerful statement. We're kind of, these intersections, think about Four Corners, that most likely is going to be developed as like a sort of mini Tacotnu with like an Olive Garden, restaurants and places where people can go work and they can engage in commerce. And that's going to be an important economic generator for the borough. It might even, form a little town. We're hoping for the best. There's nothing stopping that person to build a big house and put up a gate and say, this is mine. Typically, it's worked out pretty good for us. Ensuring that those areas are developed as commercial with medium to high residential around them so people can live and work near the places, or live or be a short drive from, I think is important for the economic vitality of this community. So, and then another one, I talked about the disconnect between subdivisions and land use. You know, this may not be popular, and it may be you know, it may be controversial, but when developers go, if we want to know what developers are doing, what the intended land use is when they do subdivision, the only way really to do that is through zoning. They can say whatever they want is going to be there, but unless it's like sort of adopted as some sort of zone, that is the tool to know what they're doing when we do the subdivision process. So when I put this presentation together, I did a deep dive on the history of zoning. And I do want to sit down with Mayor DeVries and talk about the 1980s when everything was really controversial.
When your dad sat here at the table with me.
That's right. Things, you know, even documents from the 70s, zoning was considered a dirty word around here. And there's been a lot of big efforts to do comprehensive zoning. A lot of them have failed. I guess my message is it doesn't have to be scary. It can be very overreaching. It can be overly complex, and it can stifle development. Like places that have overzoned have a real problem on their hands. But there are some low-hanging fruit that we could do that I think would only benefit this community. So. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Any more questions or comments, or should I give him another 10 minutes? He's one.
Madam Mayor.
You or I are going to be able to live that down. Yes, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, I'm sorry. The Planning Commission member next to me turned her light on just as you started to talk, and I thought it was going to be her. So anyway, go ahead, Assembly person.
Oh, I wanted to thank Manager Strachan for the presentation. I just kind of wanted to say a few thoughts in terms of this and see what other people think. This whole issue of balancing the growth we have out here is just something we struggle with on the Assembly, and the Planning Commission sees it. Me personally, I'm a huge private property rights person. Do what you want with your property until it starts to affect the use of my property and my enjoyment of property. And I think, you know, from an economic perspective, that point about businesses liking a stable climate is really important for us to think about. We saw that with the tall towers ordinance here in the borough, where we passed something and then an Assembly came in and yanked it out, and then business didn't know what to think. What am I operating under? The other thing I think about a lot is that we didn't talk about so much is the biggest investment most people in this borough make is in the property they own. And so they're investors, you know, they're private property owners. And so if you look at that list of uses that Manager Strachan had up there, most of those things are on that list because of people putting things in places you would not have expected. You know, I remember the adult shop issue. I remember the racetrack issue. I remember the proposed chlorine plant a long time ago. I know that's not on the list, but those are all things that have popped up in this borough, and then we kind of come in after the fact and put them on the list. So I'm not saying any of that to say I know what the answer is. I know this is an issue that just kind of keeps coming up, and like how we do it in the best way for businesses and investors, developers, and residents, I think is a conversation that we're continue to talk about, especially as we go over the 100,000 mark. So if there's space to continue this conversation and look at some options that wouldn't be overly restrictive, would allow people development, but also give them some of that certainty, that'd be a win-win in my book.
Did you have some comments? Go ahead.
I was just going to, thank you, Madam Mayor, but I would just like to add that this is my 6th year on the Planning Commission, and so often people are really surprised when they come to testify that that it's okay to do things different places that they don't think it's okay. And I think, you know, we even spoke tonight about maybe the gun ranges, maybe it's in the core area, maybe the rules are different in another area. We've heard that about gravel pits as well. So I think it's only reasonable for us to begin to consider where do we want things to be? People continually come to the planning commission and say, I don't want it next to me. I don't want, I didn't know they were going to do that. Well, no, we don't know. But if we had a little, I think I agree with Assembly Person Nowers. I think some certainty would be helpful to people. And I know it will be controversial to develop it, but I think it would be really kind of helpful for all of us. So thanks.
Further questions or comments? Oh, Deputy Mayor, thank you.
Yeah, so I guess I just had one comment. So we, like the core area zone and a lot of these other zones. So when you look on the borough's My Property and you look up, if you look at a parcel inside the city, you'll see that it will have zoning identified on there. But I have not ever seen any of our zoning ever identified on the My Parcel viewer. And so a lot of times in like listing documents and whatnot, the real estate agent on the My Parcel viewer. And so a lot of times in like listing documents and whatnot, the real estate agents. So is it possible to update the My Property parcel viewer with our zoning or?
Yes, that's something that I would really like to do. It was hard to get the flood zones on there, but I got those on there. But having our own zoning viewer, I think would actually be a fairly easy thing to do. Well, ideally, what I would like to do, and municipalities have done this, where you click on your property of interest, and then you have a drop. It says I want to, and you have a drop down of different types of developments that you might want to do, and it'll tell you whether it's allowed or not allowed, or whether you have to get a permit or whether you have to call for it to get more information. But that's something that would really like to work on. And I think at least just having a zoning map viewer would be a real easy thing that we could probably have up in the next couple of weeks, honestly. IT manager's not here to refute me, so.
Assembly Person Yon?
Yeah, I'll build on that. That would be awesome. I will tell you the floodplains maps, stuff that I didn't realize how hard you had to work to get on there. That's amazing. I can't believe that wasn't just common sense. So I use that all the time. So if there's something that, like Jesse said, that we could do to make it easier on the residents of the Matsu Borough to see that stuff. We run into houses right now. I mean, the attorney and I have had a lot of conversation lately just on setbacks from lakes and how the 75 feet used to be 35 feet and things change. And then people go and they're building by a lake and they have no idea because we don't have the permit process here at the Matsu Borough. So anything that we can do where we clarify stuff online and make it easy for people to seek their own answers, I think is money well spent.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead, Assembly Person Hours.
I had a question. We used to have something, I believe it was like I want to say a land use permit. I wonder if the director could speak to it. I don't know that it was a permit, but we allowed people to come to us when they were developing, and so that they would know the rules. There was no requirement that they do things, but it was a way of informing people, and we did have that in the past, I know, and then you no longer have it. I just wonder if the director could speak to that issue that was raised in terms of people knowing what the rules are, so they don't go afoul of them unintentionally, and whether that was a useful tool or was felt to be too onerous.
So to the mayor,
Go ahead,
to
sir.
Assembly Member Nowers. So from 2008 to 2011, November of 2011, we had was called a mandatory land use permit. It could also be called a zoning clearance. It essentially was, if you're going to develop something, you have to drop a little sketch of you have to have your property lines and you have to have your house or your business or whatever it is. And you have to draw the distance that was going to be from your property lines. We would then take that little napkin sketch. It didn't have to be to scale, didn't have to be by an engineer. It was a pretty simple thing. We would take that, we'd look to see if it's in a flood zone. We'd look to see if it's in a special land use district. We'd look to see to ensure that the setbacks are correct, that they're not going to be building too close to a lake or their side lot lines. I remember the day that it was repealed, it was a brand new assembly. They asked me why we have it. And I had an example of that same week. There was a commercial business that had submitted a land use permit, and they were developing like 15 feet from a right of way. And they were going to build like a $2 million building. And we said, whoa, you need to back it up 10 feet in order to be in accordance with our regulations. And they were so grateful that they had gone through that process and caught that fix right there. But nevertheless, it did get repealed. I think there's a couple, if we were to do any sort of additional zoning efforts, land use permit would be absolutely be a key part of that. But also I think with the MS4 requirements that are likely going to be coming our way, we're probably gonna have to do a land use permit with that as well. So that could be in our future, depending on how that shakes out.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so as somebody that had to do quite a few of those, and I think probably Rob as well did, they weren't particularly onerous. I mean, I don't think builders really didn't mind them, and it wasn't restrictive, but I do think that it was a useful tool for the sort of do-it-yourselfers and owner builders and that sort of thing, to prevent them from having situations where they do build too close to a setback or a right-of-way easement that they don't know is there or something like that, and that could be a really costly thing for them down the road. So I mean, I do think that it did have some beneficial effect. So.
Assemblyperson Yon?
Jesse's right. I did do a lot of those. I don't remember them taking very long to get approved. I didn't ever feel like that was a burden on me. Do you remember? Like, was that when we turned them in? Was it like a week we got a permit to? I don't remember.
It was typically a week.
Yeah.
That was our goal, was to get it turned around in a week.
I do remember being very simple. I did not have to have my surveyor give the numbers, right? We just had to give an idea, an indication. I guaranteed mine were not to scale. But as far as zoning, it might have been all the way back then. It was a long time ago that I sat on a committee here at the borough. It might have been 10 plus years. I don't know, but where we looked at zoning and we were focused on Port McKenzie in that area at that time, you know, and you may know better when that was. It was a long time ago, but zoning in a situation like that would be great. I always complain that the most valuable piece of property, the most beautiful piece of property, in my opinion, in the Matsu Borough has a Fred Meyer on it, right? Like, and it just, every time I drive by Fred Meyer's in Wasilla, I get irritated, you know, but also I really do. It drives me bonkers. But with that being said, we're not a young community. And so I could imagine it was controversial. I was not on the assembly, of course, the last time that zoning came through, and I didn't pay any attention to it because I knew that it was not going to go anywhere, right? So it would be very difficult to do. Fortunately, we have covenants, right? Like we've been building good roads since '93. There's maybe a few minor issues and some drainage stuff, but it's very, very minor. Most developers put covenants in, which is nice. It does restrict what you can do in these nicer single-family subdivisions, or I shouldn't say single-family, I should say residential, right? And so some of them allow for higher density, but I'm definitely available if you ever want to talk about the low-hanging fruit. I don't envy you if you take this fight on. I will say that. So, but I am available to help in any way I can. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Any further comments from anyone? Questions for Alex before we let him go for the third time? Okay, thank you again, sir. All righty, the next item then is the Mayor Assembly, Planning Commission, and staff comments. And Mr. Chair, we're going to allow you to ask for comments from your Planning Commission members first, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Commissioner Glenn, any comments?
I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Allen?
No comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Rubio,
No comment.
Commissioner Scoggin,
No comments.
Okay.
Vice Chair Chesbro.
Thank you. One of the things that Deputy Mayor Sumner said earlier, that I think he's right. I think for us to be able to give comments about what we reject or accept is good. Sometimes we don't know the genesis of some of those things, though. I mean, we could only respond, for example, in the one that we just dealt with, the gravel, we can only respond to what was in the document, which was, that's too low, and that didn't help us to make the decision. So I think one of the things, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we get kind of an update on things that might be going wrong with some of the things that are happening out there. And I think that would help us. And then we could actually then maybe begin to put some things together that would make more sense than just to reject something or to say, whatever. So anyways, thank you for that comment, because I think it's important for us to understand what's behind the initiatives that we get.
Okay. Sir?
I'll make it quick. I'm relatively new to the borough. Only haven't been here since '94, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, the joint items of business. But I looked through this list, and every one of them says to me, we're obviously not the borough we used to be. We're grown up now. And all of these things are, adult types of activities that the borough needs to address and take on if this is going to be somewhere that people want to live in the future. And I think it was a great list and great discussion.
Okay, thank you. Staff, manager, attorney, clerk? No? Okay. So I'll go to the two assembly people online for last minute comments. Assemblyperson Nowers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just really appreciate the discussion too. On the feedback issue to the assembly, I just wanted to second that and just also say it's on us as assembly to consider well what we send you. I don't think it was a good sign that last gravel one had unanimous opposition, including from the industry. But I think it is on us too to really be clear about what problem we're trying to solve, and maybe that should even be part of what goes forward to you. So there is some clarity there. And the other thing, just on that, the road, building roads in the valley, if that was our concern, I think that should have been in there. And I do know the current rules allow for exemption for road building, particularly just because it allows anything that's less than 2 years to go forward. So I'm sure we'll talk about that at every level, but just wanted to say I really appreciate the conversation. There was a lot of things on there, and I know the rubber hits the road sometimes at the assembly level, but it can really hit the road there at the planning commission level. So I appreciate all your service, and I was glad to hear there's an Olive Garden that's going to go in the valley. I think I heard the director say, so I'll be happy for that. Thanks, everyone.
Assemblyperson Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No comment.
Okay. Let's see. Assemblyperson Benner, go ahead.
Just prayers for friends in Ukraine.
Thank you. Assemblyperson 2.
I appreciate all the conversation tonight. And I'd like to bring up something different. I went to a high school assembly, and there was about 80 seniors that got to 3.8 and 4.0 grade averages, and they got little rewards. And then there's about 80 middle schoolers too. So we always hear how bad we're doing. I figured I'd throw that in. That's it. Good night.
Thank you. Assemblyperson Yon.
Yeah, Ted and Kim and Alex, thanks for all the hard work. Those were great presentations. I learned a lot tonight. There's a balance, but that we all juggle up here, that we want to protect the future of the Matsu Borough, but not make life any harder on the residents and so on. I know you guys got your hands full planning for the future, and nobody believes me when I say this, but I actually believe we will overtake Anchorage in population, right? Probably before some of the younger people in this room check out. So I don't think it's that far out in the future. Like I said, I don't think we're talking about our great grandkids here. We are 78% of the growth in the state of Alaska in the last 10 years, right here, right? And so how do you balance that? People are coming here for freedom. They're coming here for affordable housing. I'm proud to say I've spent my entire life fighting for and defending affordable housing, and we make things affordable in the Mat-Su Borough because we don't get in the way, right? And so you want to drive up the cost of housing, get your local government involved. You can do it pretty quick, right? And so Anchorage is, they're pretty good at it. They're actually, so, but anyway, this seems to be the place everybody wants to come, and that's awesome. I think it's amazing. We have great schools, great teachers. So I know that the balance that you guys have to look at is difficult, roads, intersections, all that stuff. And so I really appreciate the hard work. And like I said, if you got anything you want help with, let me know. So thanks.
Deputy Mayor?
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. I really appreciate it. And I think it was mentioned, but I would support that in the future we do lean more on the Planning Commission as an advisory board for regulatory review. I think a lot of times things get introduced to start a conversation. Maybe that's not where you're going to end up, but it might be a good process to use to actually say, task the Planning Commission with, there may be a problem in this area that you should review and let them have a more open-ended review and discussion about it in conjunction with the planning department. And I think we could get, we have a lot of really expert folks, engineers and excavators and whatnot on the Planning Commission. And I think we could get some pretty good results that way. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank all the staff and the presentation. I think they went very, very well. And thank the Planning Commission. I know a number of you are brand new, so hopefully you don't have buyer's remorse or anything like that. That you're going to stick it out and realize that we can disagree, but it's only when we have an exchange of ideas that, to me, we come to the best solution. So don't hesitate to feel like, oh, well, I know the assembly is going to feel this way or that way. We have you, so you can take and bring those other ideas to us. And so with that, meeting's adjourned at 8:21.